Hi, everyone. Welcome to what is the second of 5 CATS Innovation webinars. I'm really glad that you joined. Everyone, please mute their volume but turn on their video. That would be great. Josh, you get to see Josh. Josh, you get to see all of you. Welcome. My name is Ciel. I work with Dan Smokler and Mike Urim on the CATS Innovation Series. And just to remind everyone, the webinar is our continuation of what you all started at HIGA, and is also just a space for everyone to collaborate and dream and think creatively about the important work you do on campus. So we're excited to see some of the CATS Innovation Summit faces and also to welcome everyone who is new and to encourage you guys to get together on and offline to continue to think about innovation on campus. So, and if you would like information on the rest of the series and did not receive an email from me, please feel free to email me at ykeller, K-E-L-L-E-R, @pennhillel.org. I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Josh Bolton in a minute. Rabbi Josh is the director of the Jewish Renaissance Project at Penn Hillel and the author of the newly published 100 Suggestions for Seekers and Spiritual Activists, which is awesome. I highly recommend you check it out. Now that I've sufficiently embarrassed him, I will turn it over. Thank you, Josh.
Thanks, Yael. Thanks, Yael. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy noontime or 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. or 11 a.m., whatever time it is, wherever you are. It's a pleasure to get together with you guys today and to have a little bit of fun talking about coffee dating, which like to really talk about it and to talk about some of like the more abstract background behind coffee dating. It's like something that we all take for granted. It's just kind of a core component of our work. I want us to spend a little bit of time today returning to some of the questions of the what and the why, and to think a little bit about questions about how coffee dating fits into a broader, wider, bigger strategy of the entire project that we're up to here in Hillel. In order to get started, I wanted to, Julie is going to help us by, we're going to break into some smaller groups, groups of 4 or 5 people. And I want us to consider, if you actually open up your chat, you should see that if you click the chat button down there, you see that I've got 2 questions that I want us to begin with when we break into our smaller groups. One, a little bit lighter. Number 1, if you were a drink on the coffee shop menu, what would it be and what does it say about you? By the way, I just want to let you guys know before today's session, I've been drinking coffee since about 5:45 this morning, so I'm deep into the meaning and significance of coffee. But anyway, when we break into the smaller groups, you guys can choose a drink that you would be and what would it be and what does that say about you? And number 2, just to help me and help us kind of get a sense of what we can discuss today, what are the questions, reflections, and challenges with regard to the concept of coffee dating that you're bringing into this conversation? So those 2 questions, Julie is going to break us up into smaller groups of 4 or 5. We're going to have about 5 minutes in those groups, then we'll come back and share out. So Julie, take it away. Thanks.
Just accept the invite to join the breakout group. So you'll see a little invite should pop on top of your screen. You just have to accept it, or you might see at the bottom of your screen. Pam, you don't see it? No one here sees it? Okay. Josh, what do you think about a big discussion then?
I'm cool with a big discussion.
Great.
So we have a little bit of a technology flop. That's okay. Right now I see that we went from 27 participants down to 16 participants. Is that?
Yeah, some people are in the breakout groups.
Some people are in the breakout groups. Okay. So for folks who are not in the breakout groups, if we want to just like kind of linger in this space together, what are some of the questions, reflections, challenges that you're bringing this conversation. Free floor to unmute yourself and just jump in, and I'll take notes here. And also, if you want to share with what type of drink you'd be, I'm also happy to entertain that. So what are you bringing today?
Hi, this is Victor.
Hey, Victor.
Hey, Josh. First of all, I'm Cafe au lait. And that says, I don't know what that says. I'm utterly pretentious and proud of it. I guess the question that I'm bringing is, how do I make the coffee date more of a conversation and less of an interview?
Great. Okay, great. We'll talk about that. Okay. What else? What else are folks bringing with us right now?
Amy, there's something wrong with your sound. I'm sorry, can you put it in the chat? I'll give you the phone number. There's something wrong with your sound. I know we used to have this problem.
What else? Bruce Bromberg, what do you bring with you?
Well, first, I typically am tea or I'm vanilla zero Coke, but I drink some coffee. But I like the question of how to make it more of a conversation and not an interview, not just. That is also, and I really didn't know much theory about this, so kind of interested in learning. You know, it's something that I've always done but haven't thought too much about.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool. And I see James from Texas writes, one challenge I bring to a coffee date is that I'm privileged to work within Hillel as a non-Jew. Okay, that's super interesting. Super interesting. Okay, very good. Other folks, one or two other folks at all?
I'll jump in. Hi, Ariel. Okay, I think my drink is a white mocha frappuccino.
Whoa, what does that say about you?
So, aside from the fact that it's my favorite thing to drink, I think it says that I'm creative because it's something that you generally have to think of to ask for. It's not sitting on the menu. And then it's a mix of all these different things that are just going to make you happy. So nice. I'm a pleaser. Nice. I think the question that I'm bringing in with me is about follow up and follow through after a coffee meeting. If I am sitting and I'm learning all these wonderful things about a student and I want to connect them to something immediately, but that something doesn't exist and they're not showing interest in creating it for themselves, what do we do? How do we keep them engaged quickly?
Okay, cool. That's great. And anyone else? And we got one more the question, reflection that they're bringing to the conversation.
I'm happy to jump in. This is Alex. Hey, Josh. I'm curious about how much to agitate or push around Jewish identity and exploration, and at what point that is too much or not enough. What's the golden mean in agitation?
That's great. You talk about agitation. We're going to look at something that talks about provocation. So it's maybe the same thing on different ends, but yeah, absolutely. Okay. So Julie, do you want to bring everyone back to the main group?
Yep. They'll be here in 10 seconds.
Okay.
Sorry, guys. Mine disconnected. What did I miss? What was the question?
The question is, what type of drink are you? And also, what questions and reflections are you bringing to the conversation?
Okay. Sorry.
Okay. So a couple of questions about follow-up. Okay, great. So if folks are back joining us, we had some folks already kind of in a little bit smaller group, main group here, just sharing some of the reflections that they're bringing in terms of some the tension around making it conversational versus less interviewee, how to do follow-up, follow-through, and Alex was talking about how much Jewish agitation is too much Jewish agitation. By the way, I was thinking about this. I tend to order an Americano every time I go into the coffee shop, kind of keep it simple, although I'm a little surprised, it's like Americano. I've always been like kind of self-conscious as the guy who orders the Americano. But I guess that's me. You can't escape your own identity. You can't escape your own. I can't escape my Americanness. I guess that's what it says about me to some extent. So, what are some of the? Just if we could do like 2-3 more minutes. What are some of the other questions from folks coming back from the breakup groups that you guys were sharing? Questions, reflections that you're bringing to this conversation today. Some people jump in. There's anyone else out there? I can see you all.
I'll jump in. For me, it's about kind of follow up. I feel like I'll have these like great coffee dates, and we'll like go deep and we'll talk about all these things, and then kind of afterwards, like maybe I'll see them at a program, maybe I won't. And so, are there ways I can be, more effectively following up, and what does that look like?
Okay, cool. So we've had a couple of people raise the question of follow up, follow through. We could talk together about that. Okay. Anyone else? Other ideas?
Something that we talked about in my breakout session was just the changing communication trends in like Generation Z and like new students. So even just before the coffee date, like how do you actually get on the coffee date if they don't answer you and your email just goes into the abyss? So, I usually try to get to talk to students who I have at least one mutual friend with or something where like I can bring someone else up and say, like try to bring somebody else into the conversation at the beginning so that they trust me a little bit. But if I can't even get to that step, there's no coffee date at all.
Totally. And I appreciate that. Like, we'll look at this as like the art of the initial, email. And by the way, like I have found, at least in the past 2 years, that while some select special students still email, all of my initial contacts now have moved almost exclusively to Facebook Messenger. I find that students are responsive, and they seem what's the right word? Well, first of all, that they have seen it, and they know that you have seen it. So there's a level of kind of connectability vis-a-vis Messenger that I almost don't find at all with one last question, reflection, anything else before I share some stuff?
Something that we were talking about in my group was sort of translating some of what might feel successful about coffee dating from staff to students to the peer-to-peer model, whether it be with interns or other students, and that there might be like a depth or an educational component that feels like it emerges somewhat naturally when we as staff are having coffee dates, and then seeing it be more challenging for students to replicate that in a peer-to-peer setting.
Totally. That is really good. I have not prepared to think about that or talk about that, but Molly, that is like actually a really crucial, probably whole conversation about how to train, how to frame, how to talk with student interns about the obligations around coffee dating. Maybe we'll linger on that a little bit. Maybe some of what we'll share in terms of thinking about it from the staff perspective can trickle down to that space. But absolutely, we were just talking about this a couple of weeks ago or a week and a half ago when we were talking about Greek life engagement. The challenge of framing coffee dates with student interns is difficult because, of course, we frame it for ourselves as a community building technique, but we request and require our student interns to build communities long before like the process of coffee dating and community building would have taken place. So how do you reframe it? We can talk about, I can share a little bit about that. Okay, so I see some folks in the notes about getting the first coffee date and related how to get over the potential weirdness of our generation gap. I love that. I think you just have to lean into the weirdness. You know, you gotta be comfortable with the weirdness, because it's real. So what I would love to do with you guys, and if you don't mind, in just a moment, I'm going to kind of share my screen. I'm going to come out of sharing my screen. I prepared a little bit of a PowerPoint just to keep me focused and keep me on track. But really, and you should, if I share the screen here, it should get us there, right? You guys see that? Nice, beautiful blue, purple, whatever color that was. I was told that this is the, anyway, whatever, it doesn't make a difference. This is a beautiful color. Cats Innovation webinar. Welcome. Identity Percolation on the role of coffee dating for engagement. That's me, Josh Bolton. And we did the small group stuff. Oh yeah, just a little bit of background. I was just doing a little bit of reading about coffee, even though I know there's this move to get away from coffee as like, you know, not even calling it a coffee day, but I'm stuck on coffee, you know. So did you know early 1500s Sufi mystics in Yemen began to brew coffee, tapping into the beverage's unique qualities for their late night spiritual devotionals? Did you know that? I didn't know that. There's amazing articles out there. And what I love is already in about 1540, the subject of coffee comes up in some legal writings. It's actually like not such a tasteful way that it comes up. Can you drink coffee brewed by non-Jews is like the first major question. All right, I don't know if that's really relatable for us, but it's there. We've been deep into the coffee scene. I liked this note. By 1580, there was at least one coffee house in Svat. I liked how that article said at least one coffee house in Svat. And also, did you know, I thought this was really interesting with Shavuot, the holiday of the giving of the Torah, coming up, and this tradition of Tikkun Leil Shavuot, staying up to study Torah all night long. There is some kind of vague evidence that that ritual arises as coffee comes online in our Jewish communities. I love that. I love the like kind of material, cultural history thing that's going on here. So just wanted to give you a little taste of what I found when I went out there trying to like do a little, to understand what the role and relationship between coffee and the Jewish lived experiences. Anyway, this is what I want to talk about. I want to share some context and best practices, just kind of like shooting from the hip ideas that I've got. And then I want to address like the why we meet students for coffee. And then I want to address some ideas that I've inherited, frankly, about the Jewish pivot that we make in when we meet students for conversations, whether it's over coffee or over bubble tea or whatever it is, ice cream that you're meeting. Then we'll make sure that there's room for questions. A couple of context things that I want to open up with. Basically, I think that when we talk about the role of coffee dating and the role of meeting people and spending time with students one-on-one, it's important to contextualize our work as we are seeking impact. We are trying to create, build, transform Hillel into an impact organization, right? One that beyond the question of how many people are there for Shabbat, beyond the question of is the building full, beyond the question of did we make this thing that always happens every year happen again, we're trying to transform our organization and sustain our organization as an organization that is focused on making a difference in people's lives and fostering Jewish growth and transformation, right? We are trying as best as possible to be less focused on affiliation, on attendance, and on programs, and on survival, right? We are trying to begin with individuals, be innovative, support people in their growth, and make deep impacts in their lives first and foremost. It's important that we kind of open and begin with this because like so much, it's so easy at the start of the year to have this in our minds, but to get really, really quickly into the track of, well, what are we doing for Shabbat? What are we doing for X, Y, and Z? And we have to be focused on programs. Programs have to, happen. We have to have awesome things happening. But the core of our project in Hillel is making impact in people's lives, fostering Jewish growth, and creating the landscape for personal transformation, Jewishly and as humans in our work. One of the pieces that I may jump around a little bit. There'll be room for questions. I'll break this in a moment. one thing that when I came into my work here 7 years ago, my supervisor, Rabbi Mike Urim, he said something to me that stuck. He said, whatever you do, you need to be obsessed with students. And even though I thought that that was a little bit silly, or, you know, what can we say? It's, you know, it's not a technical way of talking about our work. As new Hillel employees have come online, I have found myself sharing this advice with them as well. That one of our core competencies in Hillel is that we are obsessed with meeting students. We are obsessed with meeting new students, and we are obsessed with reconnecting, rekindling, and continuing to provoke the Jewish growth of students that we already have relationships with. The difference between that really is going to distinguish us in this work is that we are hungry to meet students wherever they are, whatever their Jewish background is, whatever their personal histories are, whatever their hangups and whatever their opportunities are. So we want to be obsessed with students, and Coffee Dates is one of the, let's say, platforms of demonstrating that obsession, right? Being obsessed with students, it's a core competency. It demands strategies to meet new students. It demands a relatability on the part of us as professionals. That's a little bit to the question of what do we do with the age gap. That doesn't mean that we all have to be 24-year-olds, but it means that we have to figure out ways of connecting with students. Being obsessed with students requires a significant percentage of our work week, which means, like, as you develop your PFE for every semester, you need to be like saying 30–40% of your time is going to be spent drinking coffee or whatever it is you're doing with students, and supervisors need to work that into their supervisees' schedules, and supervisees need to be like demanding that that's a part of their that's a significant percentage of what they're up to during the week. Being obsessed with students enables Hillel professionals to understand the map of campus. And the bottom line that I will make over and over again is that social capital, or the extent to which we know the maximum number of students on campus and a strategic number of students on campus, is what guarantees our successful programming on the deeper level. Meaning everything that we do in Hillel everything that we do successfully depends upon the extent to which we know a maximum number of students as a team across the campus right there. I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment because I saw that there are some questions involved on the Jews from everywhere, coffee trade. Can we see the slides later? Very good. Anything that's coming up for folks, even in that first initial series of points there? Okay.
There's a question about defining social capital.
Right. So, great. Social capital, I'm defining it imprecisely as not just the number of students, kind of the raw number of students, the breadth of students that you know, but also thinking strategically about getting to know key connectors, leaders on campus, folks who will be, if tapped for leadership opportunities, and we could talk about the art of tapping, will enable you to extend the message and the opportunity of Hillel to a maximum breadth of students. So it's not just about your own maximum number of students known, but also the extent to which you know strategic students on campus, Jews primarily, but also non-Jews as well. Fellow travelers. I tried to not define people in the negative. So Jews and fellow travelers. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. Coffee is my job, integrating coffee dating into your weekly schedule, right? These are some questions we might ask ourselves, right? How many hours am I going to spend in one-on-one conversations with students drinking coffee, right? And we might say, how many coffee dates? And each Hillel Pro is going to have to define that. Is it 10 coffee dates a week? Is it 15, 20 coffee dates a week for engagement pros? Each staff is going to have to kind of define what that means or what is reasonable, right? We want to set aspirational but reasonable expectations and goals for ourselves in terms of coffee dates. With whom, right? Are we coffee dating existing relationships? Are we prioritizing new students? The question of coffee being our job, are we seeing coffee as kind of a primary activity of what Hillel professionals do, might be related to other questions that the staff might ask itself, such as, What percentage of campus Jews are we trying to get to know, right? Are we trying to get to know 80% of the Jews on campus? Is that possible? 90%, 50%? How are we going to do that, right? What percentage of new students will we be engaging? Whose job is it to be reaching out to those students? What's the strategy to connect with them, and where are we bringing them? And what are the strategies involved in meeting those students? Sorry, let me just go back. I'm trying to see that last thing down there. Right, our goals should be reasonable, aspirational. Coffee dates represent the best characteristics of Hillel professionals. I can't read my own last bit of that line there, but it's okay. Coffee is our job. Coffee dating, here are some 101 pieces that I'm thinking about, right? Oftentimes in our work, we're walking down campus, whether or not it's Locust Walk, or I forget what they call it at Michigan, something like the quadrangle or the triangle or whatever it is, the main space on campus, and we have lots and lots of what we call chance meetings, bumping into students. I actually have this kind of feeling that chance meetings are just as important in terms of creating long-term relationships with students as coffee dates are. But one of our kind of primary tasks is translating those chance meetings into coffee dates. And as let's see, who brought it? I forget who raised the question, but how do we go from meeting students in kind of one-off ways to sitting down for coffee for a half hour? Or how do we go from not knowing students at all, but sending cold emails or Facebook messages? And I would just say that we don't have time to go into looking at texts of draft Facebook messages, but that's something that we should be sharing best practices around. What does it feel? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? What are the words you use? What are the strategies you use to send an email to someone that you've never communicated with, or a Facebook message? Whoever it is that raised it, I think it was Haley, mentions a technique that I use, which is like the best way to meet new students is to be working through, or as I say, infiltrating existing networks that you already exist within. So if you know students in a particular sorority, it is totally reasonable that if you have a good relationship, you could say, hey, who are 3 students that you think I should definitely meet in the coming month? And then you follow up and say, hey, Katie, your friend Katie suggested that we get to know one another. In other words, leverage your existing relationships to create new openings with students that you haven't met. And still students might not respond to you, and that's just the nature of the work. But we have to be persistent in our obsession with students in order to maximize our capacity to be meeting folks. One thing that I've learned over the past, this is kind of like parenthetical, but one piece that I wanted to share with people as an emphasis is that I think that for some reason when I came in, there was this assumption that coffee dates are an hour. I think that that's actually wrong. I think that coffee dates are a half hour. I think that our days are too busy, and the nature of most of the students that we meet and also the function of coffee dates should be contextualized in a half hour imagination. What that means is if coffee dates go longer than a half hour, that's great. That represents something. But also students are busy, and there's something like positive about the energy of saying, hey, let's find a half hour to meet up. Do you have 30 minutes for us to have a quick chat, to connect, so I can learn a little more about who you are, what your story is, what you're up to. That's a much easier invitation to students, I think, at least here at Penn, I find that that's true, than it is to suggest, hey, do you got an hour to meet up? I also think strategically and the function of coffee dates work better with half-hour increments than with hour. I'll share that in a moment. And then just obviously location. Some of us have Hillel buildings, some of us don't have Hillel buildings. There's a whole, let's say, strategy of what we would call public space Judaism, getting out into campus, being radically and maximally available to bump into and be seen by people. I encourage us to be using coffee shops on campus or in town as like our main, one of our main spaces. And you have to be considerate of mutual, of location.
Josh, you have some questions in the comments.
Cool, great. Let me come back to the thing. So let's see. What does PFE mean? Performance. So PFE is a semesterly annual evaluation tool that some Hillels use. It stands for Performance Feedback Evaluation. If you don't use PFEs on your campus, I'm happy to share a rough outline of what that is. I'm not sure what's standardized across Hillel just yet. Here at Penn, we have a particular way of implementing the PFE. But what I mean to say is the PFE says, you staff member will do 20% of this and 30% of that and 5% of your time with this. And one of our categories of the 7 categories is engagement or coffee dating in some explicit way. So people will say 20% of my time or 40% of my time will be devoted to drinking coffee with students. Can you more clearly define social capital? I kind of addressed that. What about solo or part-time professionals? Solo part-time professionals, I think that like your jobs are harder and they're more defined and they are different, as are all our jobs are different. And still, I think that it is very hard for me to imagine how we do the best version of our work without emphasizing relationships as the core of our project. We have to have in other words, yes. So I think that this remains, what I'm sharing remains critical, even if you're solo or part-time. I've done solo work. We also have to imagine how much percentage of my time is going to be devoted to the one-on-one piece. Other questions that are out there? Okay, cool. Why do we meet students for coffee? Right? What are we doing? What is the function? What is the purpose? Right? You like that little aleph in the latte there? That's like the Jewish version of seeing like Mother Mary in your toast. You got that, Mother Mary in your toast? That's like a Catholic thing. Okay. The relationship, right? Sometimes we're having coffee with students just because of the relationship, right? Because you are cultivating a one-on-one relationship with students. That is a part of our job. Sometimes it goes no further than developing a mentorship, right? Sometimes it goes no further than Jewish learning one-on-one. The student is not interested, is not ready, is not is against getting involved Jewishly with Hillel, right? Sometimes we are pursuing students and are obsessed with students just because we have this unique opportunity to be what a colleague of mine called a trusted fourth space, right? We are not students' parents. We are not students' teachers. We are not students' friends. We are not students' academic advisors. There's a lot of things that we are not, but all of those knots leave us in a very unique space on campus, which allows us to be a trusted fourth space that allows us to be kind of uniquely positioned to offer mentorship for personal growth, for Jewish growth, even if it goes no further than that type of mentorship or that type of chavruta. And I mean chavruta not just in some type of technical learning sense, but as the Jewish term for mentor, or Jewish term for we each have something to learn from one another type mentorship, friendship. That is oftentimes one of the reasons why we are having coffee with folks. And I think that the question of follow through, how do we follow through? What if it's difficult to follow through? What if the students are interested? Some of our relationships are not going to be follow through relationships. They're going to be about our capacity to make impacts on people's lives through our one-on-one roles on campuses. That is just a truth. It might feel frustrating. You might be like, but you would be like a great Hillel president, but that's not where they want to be. That's not where they're ready for. And we have to kind of like recognize the boundaries between how much agitation is good and how much is not where they're not ready for. So sometimes we were meeting for coffee just for the relationship. Right? Sometimes we're meeting for coffee because, the Hillel professional is like a campus sociologist or a cartographer of the campus, right? We are going out and maximizing our one-on-one time with students because every conversation becomes an opportunity to expand our own understanding of the social networks on campus, their boundaries, right? I put boundaries in quotation marks because social networks really don't have boundaries. They're separate from one another, but they're fuzzy and intersected with one another. We're trying to understand the characteristics of those social networks and the opportunities, especially in terms of infusing those social networks with Jewish content or inviting those social networks into Jewish experiences. By meeting students one-on-one, and in as many as possible, the Hillel professional becomes more fluent in the let's say social map of campus, and that is incredibly important in terms of maximizing our impact. Also, I just wanted to point out that like leadership, when we think about our work from this perspective, has kind of like a particular angle to it, right? A student's capacity to harness or galvanize or challenge or disrupt their existing social network, that becomes kind of one of the kind of core competencies or characteristics of what student leadership looks like. And in our coffee dating, one of the things that we're looking for are potential leaders, but it's not that we're looking for like leaders like the most Jewish students or leaders with the thickest Jewish resumes. We're looking for leaders, meaning we're looking for students who have the capacity to really impact, harness, galvanize, challenge, disrupt, whatever it is, their existing social networks, right? So we're looking for students who sit kind of at the intersection of those social networks. We can't find out that information unless we're out coffee dating. And then here's the last one, number 3, why we coffee date students: larger programmatic perspective, right? This is about the follow-up and the follow-through. The third bullet point, which I call the art of tapping, right? We are meeting students because we want to have a really large portfolio of potential students, Jews that we could connect one another with, that we can create new opportunities for, that we could tap for leadership, that we can activate them as creators of Jewish life, whether or not that means creators of Jewish life in Hillel or outside of Hillel. We might be trying to meet a bunch of students, and then passing them off to Hillel, to colleagues of ours who are better suited to create opportunities for them. We might be trying to connect them with short-term opportunities. We might be trying to connect them with long-term opportunities. Those last 2 bullets are what we call recruitment. We're trying to recruit students to fill fellowships, student peer-to-peer engagement opportunities, alternative break trips, birthright, whatever it is. But the reality is, like, when we are sitting and having coffee with students, we are mostly, our job is to be asking questions, is mostly to be listening to the answers, both to create relationships, but also thinking down the line, hey, I'm going to be creating this highly tailored fellowship for sophomores in Greek life. And I know, that I've met these, number of students who are all rising sophomores who are all seem like outstanding provocateurs, and they're going to be in this variety number of Greek houses. I'm going to come back to them with that invitation, and I would only be able to come back to them with that invitation, with that personal invitation based on our relationship, because I did the work of taking them out to coffee, asking the right questions, and then listening to them. Questions about those 3? Answers to the question of why we coffee date. I feel like I'm missing a puzzle from Bill. Development Pro, kind of looking from the outside. Why is the 30-minute coffee date the ideal avenue to connect with students, to us, other networks, leadership opportunities? On my campus, it just seems like 30-minute coffee dates are, is a more reasonable ask for students, and it creates a little bit more pressure to jump in, to cut to the chase, to blame it on the work a little bit. Say, hey, listen, we're all tight with the time. I'm a Jewish professional. What's your Jewish story, man? Who are you? Where are you coming from? In other words, it creates a little bit more urgency. And I think that functionally, that for me, as a conversationalist, that has been useful. I don't know if that's the same application for development pros, but I'm not sure that not either. Any questions? Okay. So let me share with you guys a couple of other things, and then we can open up for a conversation. Making the Jewish pivot. Let's just talk about this for a moment. A lot of folks, including myself, say it's so easy to talk to students that, I get in there, we're just talking about baseball, whatever it is we're talking about, you're from New York, I'm from New York. You're basically trying to create the relationship. But then how do you do what I would call make the Jewish pivot? And this is something that there are some strategies and techniques, and maybe this is a point where we could connect to the question of student interns as well and how they make the Jewish pivot in their conversations. But it's a challenge. I would just say at the outset, right, one thing to remind ourselves about is that asking students to articulate their Jewish stories is a profoundly meaningful act, and it is central to any process of Jewish self-authorship. And I would suggest that asking students to articulate their Jewish stories is important, regardless if we are talking to so-called empowerment Jews, right? The Jews who are showing up, the Jewish leaders, as well as to engagement Jews. These are Rabbi Mike Urim's terms to distinguish between the Jews who are showing up versus the Jews who are not showing up. Both categories of Jews have probably not been really asked to articulate their Jewish stories. And it is a gift that we give them by asking that. We want to get to that part of any any coffee date. And if, and one thing that I tell students to do, and I think that it works with professionals as well, is if you feel like you are having a hard time making that pivot, like you could talk about baseball, but you can't talk about Judaism, blame it on your job. I do that all the time. I say, listen, I know we're talking about whatever it is we're talking about, but I'm a rabbi. So I have to ask you about your Jewish story. What is your Jewish story? Where do you come from? What's your deal? How do you connect? How do you not connect? If your biggest issue is you feel nervous about making that Jewish pivot, then just blame it on your work. It usually works. Or if you're a first-year pro, that's the easiest one. Say, hey, I'm new here. I'm trying to learn everyone's Jewish stories. Like, what's your Jewish story? Tell me. So blame it on the job if you've got hesitation about making that Jewish pivot in general. But we have to get to it because it's our greatest gift that we could give to Jewish students in our campus, right? So when I came here in 2011, I got handed a little article or a little piece written by my predecessor named Rabbi Joel Nickerson, who moved out to LA. Some of you might know him. He's at Temple Isaiah. And he wrote this little piece called The Art of the Initial Jewish Conversation. And he laid out in his mind, it was like consecutive stages of a conversation: investigation, validation, provocation, or Alex, that might be the agitation, and then invitation. I don't think about those as necessarily so sequential. Often you never know how a conversation is going to go, and nor do I feel that these would necessarily be the way that I articulate it, but I want to share these because it's wisdom that's been floating around, and you may have seen it, you may not have seen it. We begin all coffee dates with an attempt to investigate and to ask questions that allow students to tell their stories, both personal stories and, if they've got them, Jewish stories, and if they don't have them, Jewish stories. And as Rabbi Joel talks about, this is the educator's opportunity, or the Hillel Pro's opportunity, to be listening carefully to understand how the student's mind works. What are their concerns? What makes them excited about life, about their Jewish identity? What are they ambivalent about? What are they really concerned about as 20-year-olds? So it's a time of question asking, but it's mostly important. It's a time of listening to students. Joel also talks about the importance of validation. He says to honestly and openly validate a person's Jewish story, whatever it might be. I think this is a kind of a pastoral role that the Hillel Pro has in any coffee dating conversation, and I think this happens with students, and it also happens with other constituencies, let's say, including donors, who might be coming from strong Jewish backgrounds, thick Jewish resumes, or weaker Jewish resumes, and it's important to raise up, validate, actively hear and celebrate, or to and maybe another word is to witness who those Jews are, where they're coming from, and that they also have a seat at the table, so to speak, in this kind of contemporary conversation about Jewish life, and that they have something they stand to grow. His other two pieces are the role of provocation, which he describes as a line of serious questioning or challenging narrow beliefs. This, I think, is like the more active role. In my experience, this sometimes happens, this sometimes doesn't happen in coffee dates, and that is that, like, to open up for conversation some of the assumptions, expressions, feelings, anxieties, hopes, aspirations of the student in a way that challenges them to think more profoundly about whatever it is that they're talking about Jewishly. Whether or not, like, that's, here at Penn, someone will often tell me, they can't come to Hillel because it's like super orthodox and like basically for like super Jews, and it's like, like there's room to challenge people on that, not in a way of saying, hey, you're wrong, but hey, tell me a little more about why you think that is, why you feel that way. So it's about engaging people on what they have, on the Jewish stuff that they've put out there. It's about pivoting on the material that they have put out there. Again, this becomes difficult if someone seems like they have like a weak Jewish story, but there's ways of pivoting on weak Jewish stories as well. And then the invitation, he says, to end the conversation with an opening for future interaction. And this invitation should be tailored to the ideas and concepts that were discussed. Okay. It's like sometimes you end by saying, listen, next month I'm going to be recruiting for this Greek Life Fellowship. You're going to be perfect for it. I can't imagine it without you. I'm going to follow up. And sometimes it's like, this is awesome. I'm so glad to meet with you. I really want to figure out a way of connecting you and around some of these social justice issues that you care about. I would love to be back in touch. Sometimes you leave it open-ended. Sometimes it's a much more kind of pointed ask right at the moment. Sometimes it's an invitation that is clear, and sometimes it's an invitation that is more suggestive and open-ended, etc. Those are Joel's 4 categories: investigation, validation, provocation, invitation. It's kind of related to the question that Victor and Bruce, you guys raised about how to translate, how to go from a conversation, making it more of a conversation, less of an interview, is the way that you all put it. Right, there's an art to this, and ultimately, the work of making that pivot, of making it more of a conversation, requires us as professionals getting out there and doing the work, experimenting, asking questions in different ways, trying out openings in different ways, trying out questions that we may not have tried out before. But like I said, then sometimes there's like strategies that you can also experiment with, such as being really explicit about the pivot. Going from the conversation, going from the interview, hey, who are you, where are you from, what are your interests, yada, 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 to saying, hey, okay, that's really interesting, but I'm a Hillel professional, so you knew it was coming. What's your Jewish story, and how do you want to grow Jewishly over the coming couple of years? So I had a couple of other slides about like what to do with the coffee date that sucks, which is something that we've all experienced. But before we do it, I know we've got 10 minutes. So what are the questions that are coming to your minds? What could we speak more about? Or just what are you guys thinking in response to this material? Someone can just jump in if they want. I'm just looking at the chat to see if there's any questions that I missed from there. One new message from Amy. What are your strategies for drawing people out when they give one-word answers? I mean, does anyone, before I take a crack, does anyone else have a thought about that? We've all been there. So what do you do when you're in a coffee date and students are just like telling you one-word answers? What do you do? What do you guys do?
One thing I do is I start to share a little bit more myself and just volunteer the kind of conversation I'm hoping to be having with them, and sort of model the vulnerability to say, this is who I am, this is where I come from, this is my story, and hope that by sharing that vulnerability and also modeling that they're, it gives them permission to jump in a similar way.
Great, that's great. You could talk more. That's one option. You can that's right. You can try and invite them, try and keep inviting them. I mean, one thing that is obvious is that we're not all coffee date people, right? We're all like multiple intelligences and multiple personalities, and some of us are one-on-one setting people, and some of us are small group people, and some of us are like introverts and terrified to speak at all. And that does not mean that those students should not be met. That does not mean that those students cannot be leaders. That does not mean that those students do not want to be followed up with, but it might mean that those students do not want or are not comfortable speaking in the setting of a coffee date. And you could try other settings. You can invite them to Hillel. You can invite them to, to meet with a friend of theirs, right? Make it like 2 or 3 people together. But I think that in those settings, you try a few things, you stay optimistic, you stay positive, you stay focused on the question, on the 3 points about why we're having coffee dates, right? It could be the one-on-one relationship, right? In other words, a student who gives you one-word answers still might follow up with you later when that student is in need of mentorship or is in need of anything. You just don't know it. You're getting to know them through their one-word answers about where they're situated in the social networks on campus, and you're having coffee with them, even if they're giving you one-word answers, in order to understand how they might be actively tapped for leadership or for follow-up opportunities in the future. But I think it's a challenge to our professionalism, but it's like we stay positive, we stay focused, we stay generous. We hold open the possibility that coffee dates sometimes don't go great. And someone says we use active listening. Sure, we hold out the possibility that some coffee dates might be like, well, I'm glad to have bought you a cup of coffee. I'm so glad to meet you. If there's anything that I could do, if there's any way that we could be, if I could be a resource for you, that's all I wanted to do. And you leave it there. I think that you do not strain under the pressure, and you don't try and extend it on and on and on forever. They happen. It's just a reality. That's okay. Other questions? So Amy asked, do you take notes during coffee dates? I mean, if there seems to be something, you're always taking notes, in the sense that you're always saying, okay, well, Katie is in this sorority. She knows so-and-so. I think she would be great for this fellowship. You're always kind of taking mental notes. And some of the best professionals I know, they've showed me that they have spreadsheets where they, keep notes on students, or you're entering notes about students into the tracking system. Yeah, in some ways we're always taking notes in order to do that work of campus mapping. But very rarely do I have my computer open and I'm taking notes, although I don't know if students would mind it so much. When we do interviews for the fellowships, we are interviewing them basically, their coffee dates, and we take notes, and everyone seems fine with it. So, right, someone's saying Haley's right, I keep a very detailed spreadsheet, but your students don't know about it. There's some fine line. A bunch of students probably would not think it's that strange that we take notes on them, and some would, and we have to be thoughtful about that. And somewhat discreet, right? Yeah. So people say I always take notes and make a joke about it, right? I've seen when Hillel professionals take notes, it's best to make a joke out of it. I'm taking notes. I hope you don't mind taking notes. Nobody is really going to. They see it as part of our work, and if it's beneficial to you and the way that you work, then it is. I mean, at some point we have to be able to share with others what we learned in our coffee dates, right? We have to be able to share with our colleagues. Hey, I met Katie. She's, the president of the sorority, blah, 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 blah. Alex, that's good. You schedule some time after your coffee date for write it up afterwards. Great. Absolutely.
Can I add something? Is that okay?
Molly, yeah.
Hi. I don't usually take notes during the coffee date, but I will ask a student that if they say something about that I like want to connect them with a student that's essentially going to give me a task that I really want to remember, I ask them, it's like, oh, can I write that down so that I can remember to connect you with whoever? And I usually just ask their permission to see if it's okay, because essentially it's for them, and it's usually just fine. So.
Great, awesome, great. Anyone else? We've got like a couple of minutes left. I know Yael wants to take it back from me in a moment to just talk about the future one, but any other questions, thoughts, reflections? Cool. If there's no more, then I just want to say that it's my pleasure to share this stuff with you, and I'm also happy for any, if anybody wants to follow up or find a time to hop on a phone call for 10 minutes to think about anything in particular. I'm happy to share the PowerPoint if anyone is interested in it, and I'm happy to share anything else, including the, although you should be able to find Rabbi Joel Nickerson's piece on Hillel.org, or if you searched it, I think it's out there somewhere. But I'm happy to we'll be happy to follow up with that piece as well. So thank you, everyone. Yael.
Thank you, Rabbi Josh. That was really super interesting and helpful, I'm sure, for everybody on the call. So thank you again. I want to remind everybody that the next presentation, the third in the CATS Innovations webinar series, will be Rabbi Dan Smokler, and he'll be speaking about how to organize a community from soup to nuts. It will be May 3rd at 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So same time, May 3rd, Rabbi Dan Smokler, not to be missed. I hope that you will join us. And I believe that Julie will send out Rabbi Josh's slides, whether you want them or not, and you can always access the recording of the video after the fact. Again, if you did not get information about the entire series and want it, please feel free to email me, ykeller@pennhillel.org. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.